"Would you like to dance with me, young lady?" The question landed in the dead silent lobby of Lockwood Industries with the force of a thrown stone. It was all wrong. The voice was too gentle for a place built on sharp edges and cold transactions. The words were a language no one spoke here. In this glass and steel canyon, you didn't ask to dance. You asked for quarterly reports and market projections. Lyra Lockwood's head snapped up. Her eyes, usually lost in the middle distance, focused on the man kneeling in front of her wheelchair. He wore a gray janitor's uniform, faded at the knees. His face was kind, but tired, etched with lines that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with something sad and deep. He wasn't looking at the chair. He was looking at her. She said nothing. She couldn't. A year of silence had built a fortress around her. Her fingers, which had been picking at a loose thread on the blanket over her lap, went still. Outside, thunder rumbled, a low growl against the city's hum. Lyra flinched, her shoulders hunching. The janitor smiled, a small, knowing expression. He didn't seem to need an answer. He just stood, his movements possessing a fluid grace that seemed out of place with his drab uniform. He walked over to his janitorial cart, took hold of the broom, and turned back to face the empty center of the lobby. He held the broom like a partner, his left hand on the handle, his right on the bristles. He began to hum, a tune so faint it was barely more than a breath. Then he started to move. It wasn't cleaning, it was dancing. He waltzed with the broom, his worn boots gliding over the polished marble. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He swept through an imaginary ballroom, his eyes closed, a phantom smile on his face. He was somewhere else entirely, in another time, with another partner. Lyra watched, her breath caught in her throat. The rumble of the storm faded. The intimidating scale of the lobby shrank. There was only the quiet man and his impossible, beautiful dance. For the first time in a year, she wasn't thinking about the accident. She wasn't thinking about the chair. She wasn't thinking about her father, who had looked at her with pity and then walked away. Forever. She was watching a secret performance, meant only for her. The man spun to a final, graceful stop, bowing to his wooden partner. He leaned the broom against a pillar and walked back to her. He gestured to the open floor. "Your turn." He moved behind her chair. She felt herself tense up, expecting the rough, efficient shove she got from nurses and assistants. But his touch was different. It was light, confident, the touch of a dancer. "No need to stand to dance," he whispered, his voice close to her ear. "Just feel the music." He pushed off, and Lyra flew. He didn't just push her in a straight line. He guided the chair in long, sweeping curves, turning and spinning her in a gentle, controlled momentum. He was leading her in a waltz. Her hair lifted from her shoulders. The sterile air of the lobby rushed past her cheeks, and a sound erupted from her chest, something rusty and unfamiliar. Laughter. It was a pure, bubbling, unstoppable sound. A sound of release. A sound of joy. It bounced off the cold marble walls, filling the space with a life it had never known. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the air like a razor blade. The dance stopped. The laughter died. Geneva Lockwood stood by the main entrance, her knuckles white on the handle of her leather briefcase. Rain slicked her black trench coat. Her face, usually a mask of calm, formidable control, was twisted with a fury so cold it burned. Her eyes darted from the janitor's uniform to her daughter's face. A face that was, for one shocking moment, alight with a joy she hadn't seen since before the world had broken. The sight of that joy, created by this nobody, this janitor, was a personal insult. It was a glaring spotlight on her own year of failure. "Mom," Lyra whispered, the light in her eyes already fading. "We were dancing." "Quiet, Lyra," Geneva commanded, her voice dangerously low. She marched toward them, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the floor. She pointed a trembling finger at Penn. "You, step away from my daughter, now." Penn slowly removed his hands from the chair handles and took a step back, his own expression calm. "My apologies, ma'am. I was just trying to—" "I know exactly what you were trying to do," she cut him off. "You were trying to get yourself fired, and you have succeeded. Collect your things. You have 5 minutes to be out of this building before I call security." "He made me laugh, Mom," Lyra said, her voice a tiny, desperate plea. Geneva flinched as if struck. She looked at her daughter. She saw the flushed cheeks, the bright, pleading eyes. It was true. He had broken the spell. He had reached a part of her daughter that a fortune in medical bills and a team of world-class specialists had declared unreachable. The realization didn't soften her. It enraged her further. It was a loss of control, and Geneva Lockwood did not lose control. She took a deep breath, the CEO wrestling the furious mother back into its cage. Her voice became clipped, all business. "Forget your things," she said to Penn, her eyes like chips of ice. "Just get out." She turned her back on him, dismissing him as she would a faulty piece of equipment. But Penn didn't move. "Before I go," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the silent lobby, "you should know, your daughter isn't broken. She's just waiting for someone to ask her to dance." Geneva froze, her back still to him. The simple truth of his words, the sheer audacity of them, hung in the air. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want him to be right. She turned around slowly, her face a battleground of conflicting emotions. The anger was still there, but now it was threaded with a desperate, terrifying flicker of hope. She looked at the man she was about to fire, this quiet janitor who saw things she couldn't, who did things she couldn't. And she made a decision. "My office," she commanded, the words sharp, decisive. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, don't be late." Without another glance, she took control of Lyra's wheelchair and propelled it toward the elevators, leaving Penn standing alone in the vast lobby, the weight of that summons settling on his shoulders like a shroud. He had either just saved his job, or he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He wasn't sure which. The elevator ride to the 80th floor felt like a journey to another planet. The air grew thinner, the silence more profound. When the doors opened, they did so without a sound, revealing a reception area that was more art gallery than office. A single, severe-looking woman sat behind a white desk, her eyes flicking over Penn's gray uniform with dismissive precision. She didn't ask his name. "Ms. Lockwood is expecting you," she said, her voice as sterile as the surroundings. She gestured toward a set of massive frosted glass doors. Penn nodded and walked toward them. With every step on the plush, sound-eating carpet, he felt the weight of the world he was entering. This was a place of immense power, designed to make a man like him feel like an insect. He thought of Anna and Lily, of the laughter that used to fill their tiny apartment, and he straightened his back. He had faced worse than an angry CEO. The office was exactly as he'd imagined, only colder, a vast expanse of white and chrome, with a window that owned the sky. Geneva Lockwood stood with her back to him, staring out at the city below. She wore a sharp, dark pantsuit that was probably worth more than he made in 6 months. She let him stand there in silence for a full minute, a classic power move. Penn waited. He was good at waiting. Grief had taught him patience. "I spent last night learning about you, Mr. Holloway," she said finally, her voice calm and controlled, betraying none of the previous night's fury. She turned, a tablet held loosely in one hand. "Penn Holloway, a name that used to be in the paper for winning choreography awards, not for mopping floors. You and your wife, Anna. You were brilliant by all accounts, a golden couple of the dance world." She paused, her eyes narrowing as she searched his face for a reaction. "Then a fire, 6 years ago. Your home, your wife, your daughter, Lily." She said their names like they were facts in a report, weapons to be used. Penn's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching just below his ear. He said nothing, He just breathed. You walked away from it all, she continued, pressing her advantage. No interviews, no public appearances. You fell off the face of the earth and landed in my basement with a mop. So I have to ask myself why. Is this penance? Are you trying to punish yourself? Or did you see my daughter, a broken little girl, and think you could find some kind of redemption by playing the hero? The words were designed to hurt, to peel back his skin and see what lay beneath. But Penn had lived with his pain for so long. It was a part of him. Her prodding was nothing new. I saw a child who looked lonely, he repeated, his voice quiet but unshakable. The same way I was lonely. There was nothing more to it than that. Geneva's eyes flashed with frustration. She couldn't get a rise out of him. He wasn't playing the game by her rules, so she changed tactics. She put the tablet down and her tone shifted, becoming brisk and transactional. Yesterday you made my daughter laugh, she said, her voice sharp. It was the first time since her father, my ex-husband, decided a child in a wheelchair was bad for his brand and walked out on us. The admission was quick, bitter, and immediately locked away again. Her doctors have given up. They talk about managing her condition, not curing it. They say her spirit is broken. She walked around her massive desk and sat in the throne-like chair. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thick company checkbook, and uncapped a pen. The scene was almost identical to his nightmare from the night before. I don't know what your trick is, and frankly, I don't care, she said, her eyes on the checkbook. But it worked. I want you to do it again. I'll pay you $20,000 a week. That's over $1 million a year. You'll no longer be a janitor. Your title is Youth Wellness Consultant. You'll have an office, a staff if you need it. Your only duty is Lyra. She wrote the check with swift, angry strokes, tore it from the book, and slid it across the miles of polished wood that separated them. Your first week's salary, in advance. Penn looked at the slip of paper. He saw the impossible number of zeros. He saw a life without worrying about rent, about bills, about the cost of groceries. He saw an escape. Then he looked at Geneva's face. He saw a woman so used to buying solutions that she had forgotten how to feel them. He saw a mother so desperate she was trying to purchase her daughter's happiness. He shook his head. No, he said softly. Geneva's perfectly manicured hand, resting near the check, twitched. I'm sorry. Her voice was dangerously quiet. I can't take your money. A flash of anger crossed her face. Are you trying to negotiate with me? Fine, 30,000, 40. Just name your price, Mr. Holloway. Everyone has one. Friendship can't be bought with money, Ms. Lockwood. The words, so simple and out of place, hung in the air-conditioned silence. Geneva stared at him, truly baffled. She could understand greed. She could understand ambition. This, she couldn't understand. It was a variable she couldn't account for. What is this, then? She demanded, suspicion hardening her voice. A moral high ground? Some sort of power play? No, ma'am. He took a step closer to the desk, and the space between them no longer felt so vast. His quiet dignity filled the room. It's a simple truth. You can't hire a friend. You can't put a price on trust. He looked her straight in the eye. Your money and your doctors are all trying to fix Lyra's legs. You're paying them to fix a problem, but Lyra's not a problem. She's a person, and her heart is what needs fixing first. He drew himself up. So, I'll say it again. I won't be her consultant. I won't take your money, but I will keep my job as a janitor. And if you let me, he paused, his voice softening, I will be her friend. I will teach her how to dance, and I will do it for free. He turned to leave, the check still lying on the desk. An insult to the entire world she had built. He had his hand on the doorknob when her voice, strained and sharp, cut through the silence. Holloway. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Her physical therapy session is at 4 p.m., she said, the words clipped. In the wellness center on the 3rd floor. He waited. I expect you to be there. It was not a request. It was an order. The only way she knew how to concede. The only way she knew how to say please. Penn allowed himself a small, private smile before he opened the door and walked out, leaving the check and the powerful woman behind the desk, in a state of profound, unsettling confusion. The wellness center on the third floor smelled of good intentions and quiet failure. The air was a sharp, clean mix of disinfectant and the rubbery scent of exercise mats. It was a place of charts and machines, a room where hope was measured in millimeters of movement and usually came up short. Penn walked in at 4 o'clock on the dot. Geneva was already there, standing stiffly in a corner, her arms crossed, looking as out of place as a hawk in a canary cage. Dr. Evans, Lyra's physical therapist, was helping Lyra from her wheelchair onto a padded therapy table. She was a woman in her 50s with kind, tired eyes that had seen too much disappointment. She looked up as Penn entered, her gaze questioning. "Mr. Holloway will be observing today," Geneva stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Dr. Evans gave a tight, professional nod, her eyes sweeping over Penn's janitor uniform with polite confusion before turning back to her patient. "All right, Lyra," she said, her voice a practiced, soothing monotone. "Let's start with our usual passive stretches. We're just going to wake up the muscles." For the next 15 minutes, Penn watched in silence. Dr. Evans was gentle. She was competent. But she was talking to Lyra's legs, not to Lyra. She moved the girl's limbs through a series of robotic motions, her voice a constant, clinical commentary. "Okay, now the hamstring stretch. Can you feel that, honey? Just try to relax into it." Lyra stared at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling. Her face was blank. Her body was limp, a doll being manipulated. On a monitor beside the table, a machine that measured nerve-to-muscle response showed a line as flat and lifeless as the room's atmosphere. This wasn't therapy. It was a ritual of defeat. Penn felt a familiar ache in his chest. He saw his own daughter, Lily, in the hospital after a bad fall, her face pale with fear. And he remembered what Anna used to say, "A body can't heal where the spirit doesn't want to live." He couldn't stay silent any longer. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Doctor." Dr. Evans stopped, looking at him with a raised eyebrow. Geneva tensed in the corner. "May I try something?" Penn asked, his voice respectful. Dr. Evans glanced at Geneva, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The doctor stepped back, her arms folding across her chest, her expression a mask of deep skepticism. She was humoring the boss, nothing more. Penn walked over to the table and knelt beside it, bringing his face level with Lyra's. "Hey there, dancer," he said softly. Lyra's eyes, which had been vacant, shifted to focus on him. A tiny spark ignited in their depths. "Let's forget about this room," he whispered. "Let's pretend we're on a big sunny beach. Can you feel the warm sand?" He took her hand, his thumb gently rubbing the back of it. "Let's dip our fingers in the ocean. Let's make little waves." He hummed their waltz, and slowly, Lyra's hand began to move with his, her fingers making small, graceful arcs in the air. "That's it," he murmured. He looked up at Dr. Evans. "What exercise were you doing?" "Passive arm extensions to maintain shoulder mobility," the doctor replied, her tone dry. "Okay." Penn looked back at Lyra. "Let's be eagles. We're soaring over a big canyon. Stretch your wings out as far as they can go. Feel the wind under them. Show me how you fly, Lyra." And Lyra, her eyes still locked on his, slowly, beautifully extended her arms. Dr. Evans' skeptical posture softened slightly. She took a step closer. "What's next, Doctor?" Penn asked. "Gluteal activation," she said, still sounding doubtful. "We need her to consciously contract the gluteal muscles. The signals just aren't getting through." Penn nodded. "Lyra, imagine you're a great queen sitting on a huge golden throne. A queen has to sit tall and proud, right? Show me how a queen sits. Squeeze everything like you're holding the whole world together. Give me the queen squeeze." Lyra giggled, a small, delightful sound. She shifted on the table, a subtle tightening of her posture. On the monitor, the flat line trembled. It was almost nothing, but it wasn't nothing. Dr. Evans' eyes widened. Now came the part Penn had been dreading. The leg lifts. The part of the session Dr. Evans had told Geneva always ended in frustration and tears. This is where we try to get her to lift her leg, even a centimeter using the quadriceps, Dr. Evans explained, her voice low. It's never worked. Penn nodded. He leaned close to Lyra again. Okay, kid, big finale time. We're not lifting a leg. We're doing a kick, a giant Broadway kick for the final number. He grabbed a small, rolled-up towel. This is the villain, he said, placing it on her thigh. And you have to kick him all the way across the stage. He's a real mean guy. Lyra's eyes danced. She was in the story with him now. Okay, doctor, Penn said, his voice dropping to an intense stage whisper. Get ready. He looked at Lyra. The music is getting louder. The drums are rolling. Boom, boom, boom. The audience is on their feet. The spotlight is on you. It's all up to you, Lyra. Wait for that big crash of the cymbal. Wait for it. Get ready. Kick! At his final word, Lyra let out a sharp cry of pure effort. Her face was screwed up in concentration, her entire body straining, her mind not on her leg, not on the muscle, but on kicking that villain off the stage. The line on the monitor leaped. It was a jagged, beautiful, impossible spike of green light. Dr. Evans let out a gasp so loud it echoed in the quiet room. Her hand flew to her chest. Oh my God! Geneva, in the corner, took an involuntary step forward, her own hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Do it again, Dr. Evans breathed, her voice trembling. You heard her, Lyra, Penn urged. The villain came back for more. He's tougher this time. You have to give it everything you've got. Ready and kick! Lyra yelled with the effort, and again, the line spiked on the monitor. Even higher this time. Tears were now openly streaming down Dr. Evans' face. She abandoned her clipboard and rushed to the side of the table, looking at Lyra's still leg, then at the monitor, then at Penn. She was looking at him as if he were a magician. How? She whispered, her professionalism completely shattered. How are you doing this? Penn just smiled, his own eyes misty. He looked at Lyra, who was staring at her own leg with a look of dazed wonder. She's not trying to fire a neuron, Penn said softly. She's trying to dance. Lyra pushed herself up on her elbows, her face glowing with sweat and a fierce, newfound pride. She looked at her mother across the room, and then at Penn. I kicked him, she said, her voice filled with awe. I kicked the villain. Yeah, you did, kid, Penn said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. You brought the house down. That single, miraculous kick cracked the world open. The therapy room was no longer a place of clinical measurement. It became a laboratory of joy. Dr. Evans, her tired cynicism replaced by a convert's zeal, threw out her old lesson plans. Her first question each session was now directed at Penn. All right, dancer man, she'd say, pointing to a chart of the human leg. Today's goal is activating the tibialis anterior. In English, we need her to flex her foot upwards. What have you got? Penn would tilt his head, a thoughtful smile on his face. Okay, Lyra, he'd say, kneeling by the table. Imagine you're stomping grapes to make wine, but you have to do it really, really slowly. Squeeze all the juice out. Lift your foot like you're pulling it out of the sticky grapes. Show me the grape stomp. And Lyra, giggling, would try. Her foot, which had been limp and useless for over a year, would tremble and lift, just a fraction of an inch. Every tiny movement was a victory that left the three adults in the room breathless. The real breakthrough came a week later. Penn was working on Lyra's feet, gently massaging them to encourage blood flow. It was a part of the therapy she hated, a reminder of the parts of her that felt dead. Close your eyes, kid, Penn said softly, trying to distract her. We're back on that beach. The sun is warm, and we're about to dip our toes in the ocean for the first time. It's going to be cold. Ready?" He gently took her big toe and gave it a little wiggle. "Brr, chilly," he said. Lyra gasped. It was a sharp, sudden intake of air. Her eyes flew open, wide with a look of pure shock. "What is it, honey?" Geneva asked, rushing to the side of the table. "What's wrong?" Lyra didn't look at her mother. She stared at her own foot, her face a mask of disbelief. I felt that," she whispered, her voice trembling. She looked at Pennsylvania. "Your hand. I felt you touch my toe." The room went completely still. Dr. Evans froze, her pen hovering over her chart. Geneva covered her mouth, a sob caught in her throat. Penn's heart hammered against his ribs. "This one?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as he gently wiggled the toe next to it. Lyra let out a shaky, laughing sob. "Yes, that one too. It tickles." Geneva collapsed into a nearby chair, all the strength gone from her legs, and cried. Not quiet, controlled tears, but huge, racking sobs of relief and gratitude that came from a place so deep inside her she'd forgotten it existed. Lyra was crying too, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Penn just knelt there, holding Lyra's foot, his own vision blurred. He felt Anna's presence in that room so strongly, a warm hand on his shoulder, whispering, "See, this is why we dance." That night, Geneva didn't ask, she told. "We are celebrating, and I don't want to go to some stuffy restaurant with white tablecloths. I want to go somewhere real." She looked at Pennsylvania. "You pick." An hour later, they were sliding into a cracked red leather booth at Gino's, a small neighborhood pizzeria with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox in the corner. It was a place Penn and Anna used to go after long rehearsals. The air smelled of garlic, oregano, and decades of happy memories. Lyra, sitting between them, was giddy. She'd never been to a place like this. She spun the Parmesan cheese dispenser like a top and peppered Penn with questions. "Did you really come here all the time? Did they have video games? What's your favorite topping?" Geneva watched, a small, tentative smile on her face. She looked around at the families laughing, at the simple, unpretentious joy of the place. She felt like a tourist in the land of normal people. When the pizza arrived, a huge, gooey, imperfect circle, Lyra ate with gusto. In between bites, Geneva found herself talking, not as a CEO, but as a mom. "My husband, Richard," she began, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "He loved places like this, or he pretended to. It was all part of his image, the man of the people. It was all a performance." She stared into her water glass. After the accident, the performance stopped. The man of the people couldn't be seen with a daughter who couldn't walk. He said he needed some space. A month later, his lawyer called. He was gone. Penn listened, his expression full of a quiet understanding. "I'm sorry," he said. She waved a hand, dismissing the sympathy. "Don't be. It was like a business deal that went bad. I cut my losses and moved on." But her voice trembled, betraying the lie. The worst part was Lyra. She kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I didn't know how to tell her that he was a coward who ran away. "So you built walls," Penn said, not as a question but as a statement. "To protect her, and to protect yourself." "I built an empire," she corrected, a flicker of the old, defensive Geneva returning. "Walls," Penn repeated gently. "I know, because I built them too." He looked at Lyra, who was now trying to see how much cheese she could stretch from her slice. "After I lost Anna and Lily, I locked myself away. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't go to our old neighborhood. I couldn't stand to see other families laughing because it felt like they had stolen something from me." He sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "I wasn't living, Geneva. I was a ghost. For 6 years. Just going through the motions. Mopping floors was good for that. It was rhythmic, mindless, safe." "What changed?" she whispered. His gaze softened as he looked at Lyra. She did. I saw her in that lobby, all alone. And she reminded me of Lily. Not how she looked, but how she felt. Like a little bird with a broken wing. And I had to try. I had to see if I could remember how to fix things. His voice cracked. Anna always said I could fix anything, but I couldn't fix the fire. He looked down at his hands. Helping Lyra. It feels like I'm finally honoring them. Like I'm using the love they gave me instead of just burying it. Geneva felt tears prick her eyes. She understood. The walls she had built to keep the pain out had also kept the joy out. Penn had walked through those walls, not by breaking them down, but by simply showing her the door. She reached across the table and, this time, she didn't hesitate. She put her hand over his. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. It was the warmest, most real thing she had felt in years. "Thank you, Penn," she said, her voice full of an emotion she couldn't name. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. "Thank you, Geneva." Miles away, in a sleek, silent office that was the polar opposite of Gino's pizzeria, Daniel Corbett leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. On his desk was a glossy black folder, delivered by a private investigator an hour earlier. He opened it. Inside were the pictures of Penn from the bar, his face a mask of grief and despair. The old police report from the shouting match. And a new addition, a grainy, long-lens photo of Penn, Geneva, and Lyra, sitting in the booth at Gino's, Geneva's hand covering Penn's. It was perfect. "Look at this," Corbett murmured to the empty room. The powerful CEO holding hands with the grieving, unstable janitor in some working-class dive. He picked up his phone and dialed his contact on the Omnicorp board. "Stephen, it's Daniel Corbett," he said, his voice smooth and confidential. "Yes, everything is going well, but something has come up regarding Geneva's leadership that I think you and the board need to be aware of. It pertains to a significant, undisclosed liability risk and a serious question of her personal judgment. I'm sending a file over now. I think you'll find it illuminating." He hung up the phone, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He looked at the photo of the happy trio in the pizza parlor. "Checkmate, Geneva," he whispered, and took a slow, satisfying sip of his expensive scotch. The weeks that followed the night at the pizzeria were like living in a different world. The heavy cloud of grief and despair that had lingered over Lyra and her mother for so long had finally begun to part, letting in shafts of brilliant, warm sunlight. The therapy room was now their sanctuary, a place where impossible things happened on a daily basis. Lyra, fueled by her progress and Penn's relentless encouragement, attacked her therapy with the grit of a seasoned athlete. The harness that once held her entire weight now served only as a safety net. Today was the day she was going to let go. "Okay, kid," Penn said, his voice a low, steady murmur. He stood in front of her, his hands hovering but not touching. Lyra stood at the ballet bar, her own hands resting lightly on the wood. "You've done this 100 times with a harness. It's no different. The floor is still there. I am still here." Geneva stood by the door with Dr. Evans, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She held her breath, her heart pounding in time with the soft, inspirational music playing from the speakers. "I'm scared," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide in the mirror, looking at her own trembling reflection. "Good," Penn said with a smile. "Scared means you're about to do something brave." He looked at her reflection in the mirror, his gaze meeting hers. "You ready to fly, dancer?" Lyra took a deep, shaky breath. She looked at her hands on the bar. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted one hand. Then, with a gasp of effort, she lifted the other. She was standing, alone, unsupported. Her legs shook like leaves in a storm, but they held. 1 second, 2, 3. A universe of time passed. A triumphant, tearful grin spread across her face before she wobbled and Penn's strong hands were there, catching her and easing her back to the safety of the bar. The room exploded. Geneva let out a cry of pure joy and rushed forward, wrapping her daughter in a fierce hug. Dr. Evans was clapping, tears running down her cheeks. "I did it!" Lyra yelled, her voice hoarse with emotion and effort. "I stood all by myself." "You were magnificent," Geneva whispered, kissing the top of her head over and over. She looked over Lyra's shoulder at Penn, her eyes shining with a love and gratitude so powerful it took his breath away. In that moment, they weren't a CEO and a janitor. They were just two parents, united in the beautiful, earth-shattering miracle of their child. Later that afternoon, the mood of celebration carried them up to the 80th floor. But for the first time, Penn didn't feel like an intruder in Geneva's office. He was an equal. They were spread out on the floor, surrounded by blueprints for the Rhythm and Light Center. Lyra, in her wheelchair, was acting as chief consultant, pointing to plans and issuing decrees. "The main studio has to be yellow," she stated firmly, "because yellow is the color of happy, and we need a disco ball." "A disco ball is non-negotiable," Penn agreed solemnly. Geneva laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent, more natural. "Fine, one disco ball, but I'm drawing the line at a fog machine." They worked together with an easy, comfortable intimacy. They were building more than just a center. They were building a future, the three of them. The pain of their pasts hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer an anchor, but a foundation, a source of shared strength and understanding. The buzz of Geneva's phone on the desk was a harsh, unwelcome intrusion. She glanced at it, her smile fading instantly. The message was from her chief of staff. It was short and brutal. "Urgent. Corbett has called an emergency board meeting, 9 a.m. tomorrow. He's moving to have you suspended as CEO, citing your unstable leadership and high-risk personal associations as a danger to the Omnicorp merger." The sunlight in the room seemed to dim. The warmth evaporated, replaced by the familiar, icy chill of the corporate world. "Geneva?" Penn asked, seeing the color drain from her face. "What is it?" She couldn't speak. She just handed him the phone. He read the message, his own stomach twisting into a cold knot. It was happening. The outside world, with all its cruelty and calculation, was coming to tear their fragile new piece apart. He looked at Lyra, who was happily drawing a giant disco ball on a piece of blueprint paper, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. Later that night, after Lyra was asleep, Penn found Geneva in her office. The blueprints were gone. In their place was a single black folder, Corbett's dossier. Her legal team had gotten a copy. She pushed it across the desk toward him. "They're going to destroy you, Penn," she said, her voice flat and dead. "And they're going to use you to destroy me." He opened the folder. He saw the pictures of himself in the bar, his face bloated with grief. He saw the police report from the night he'd yelled outside the dance studio. He saw the photo from Gino's, their hands clasped together, framed to look like a sordid affair. They had twisted his pain into a weapon. A wave of guilt so profound, it made him feel sick washed over him. He had done this. His past, his brokenness, he had brought it into their lives, and it was going to ruin them. "I'll fix this," he said, his voice hoarse. He stood up, his mind racing. "I'll leave. Tonight. I'll write a confession. I'll tell them I manipulated you, that I was after your money. I'll be whatever villain they need me to be. They'll have their story, and they'll leave you and Lyra alone." Geneva looked up at him, and he was shocked to see not fear in her eyes, but a blazing, righteous fury. "No," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She stood up and walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of him. "Absolutely not. Do you hear me? But Geneva, your company, your reputation—" "My reputation?" She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "For years, my reputation was that of a ruthless ice queen who valued profits over people. I hated that woman. You, Penn, you and Lyra, you saved me from her. I'm not going back." She reached out and gripped his arms, her fingers digging into his worn work shirt. "You taught my daughter not to be afraid of falling. You stood by her and promised you wouldn't let her go. You are not allowed to run away now. We are not running away now." Her eyes burned with a fierce loyalty that humbled him. This was the real Geneva. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen, but a fighter, a mother, a woman who had finally found something worth more than her empire. "They want to fight, Penn," she said, her voice now a steady steel blade. "They want to talk about my fitness to lead." She smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. "Okay, let's give them something to talk about." He looked down at her, at this incredible, strong woman who was willing to risk everything for him. For them. The guilt was replaced by a surge of fierce, protective love. He had thought he was saving her, but the truth was, they were saving each other. "Okay," he said, his own voice finding its strength. "What's the plan?" "The plan," she said, her grip on his arm softening, "is that tomorrow we walk into that boardroom together, and we dance." The boardroom on the 80th floor was a lion's den, and Geneva Lockwood was walking into it willingly. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and corporate hostility. 10 board members, a jury of her peers and predators, sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces grim and unreadable. At the far end, Daniel Corbett stood beside a large screen, a smug, predatory confidence radiating from him. He tasted blood in the water. Penn walked in beside her. He wore a simple, dark suit Geneva had insisted he buy, a suit that felt like a costume. He wasn't a man of suits and boardrooms, but as he met the cold, assessing gazes of the board, he stood taller. He wasn't here as a janitor or a director. He was here as Geneva's friend. That was the only title that mattered. They took their seats, and Corbett began. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he started, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. "I've called this meeting because, as we approach the finish line of the Omnicorp merger, I've become aware of a significant and undisclosed risk to this company. A risk stemming directly from the compromised judgment of our CEO. He clicked a remote. A photo flashed onto the screen. It was Penn, years ago, unshaven and haunted, sitting alone in a dark bar. "This is Penn Holloway," Corbett announced, "the night janitor. For reasons that defy logic, Ms. Lockwood has granted this man unprecedented access to her family and, by extension, her professional life. But who is he, really?" Click. The police report appeared. The words "public disturbance" and "erratic behavior" highlighted in red. Click. The photo from Gino's of Penn and Geneva's hands clasped across the table zoomed in and grainy, implying a sordid secret. "He is a man with a documented history of emotional instability," Corbett said, his voice dripping with false concern. "A man who, after a personal tragedy, has clearly been unable to cope. And this is the man our CEO has chosen as her closest confidant. She has been derelict in her duties, missing key meetings for personal reasons. She has made him the center of her world, at the expense of this company." He looked around the table, letting his poison sink in. "Can we entrust a $10 billion merger to a leader who is being manipulated by a man like this? Can we risk our shareholders' futures on such a catastrophic lapse in judgment?" He turned his gaze on Geneva. "This isn't personal, Geneva. It's a matter of fiduciary duty. The board must act. I am proposing an immediate vote to install an interim CEO, someone with a clear head, to guide us through this vulnerable period." The room was deathly quiet. The board members shifted uncomfortably, looking from the damning photos to Geneva's impassive face. Corbett had played his hand perfectly. He had presented a case built on risk, liability, and the appearance of impropriety. The holy trinity of corporate anxiety. Geneva let the silence stretch for a beat. Then, she slowly rose to her feet. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She did not look at the screen. She looked at the men and women who held her career in their hands. "Mr. Corbett is right about one thing," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with clarity. "My judgment was compromised." A murmur went through the room. Corbett's smug smile widened. For 13 months, I judged my daughter's life by the flat line on a medical monitor. I judged my own life by the rising line of our stock price. I believed that strength was the absence of emotion, and that control was the same thing as love. She took a breath. I was wrong. She turned her eyes to Corbett, and for the first time, he saw not a cornered executive, but a woman he had fundamentally underestimated. You show this board a picture of a grieving man in a bar, and you call him unstable, she said, her voice gathering power. I call him a father who lost everything and was still breathing. That's not weakness, Daniel. That is a strength you can't even comprehend. You show them a police report about a man yelling in the street, and you call him erratic. I call him a husband so full of love for his dead wife that he couldn't bear to see her name taken off a building. You see liability. I see a heart that refused to stop loving. Her voice grew stronger, filled with a passion that electrified the room. And you show them a picture of me holding this man's hand, and you try to paint it as something sordid. You want to know what it was? It was gratitude. It was me, holding the hand of the man who was giving my daughter back to me, piece by piece, when the rest of the world, myself included, had given up. She turned back to the board. You want to talk about my judgment? My judgment has never been clearer. This company's greatest asset isn't the Omnicorp deal. It's our ability to create, to innovate, to make a positive impact on the world. That is our real legacy. She pressed a button on the console. The screen behind Corbett went black. So I'm making a new judgment call. The Lockwood Foundation is being repurposed. We are dedicating our resources to building the Rhythm and Light Center, a state-of-the-art facility for children with disabilities, a place where healing is found through art and connection. A stunned silence fell. And yes, she said, looking straight at Corbett, a defiant fire in her eyes, I am appointing Mr. Penn Holloway as its executive director. Before Corbett could sputter a response, the massive boardroom doors swung open. Every head turned. Penn stood in the doorway. He met Geneva's gaze across the room and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he stepped aside, and Lyra walked in. She wasn't in her chair. She wasn't in her braces. She was on her own 2 feet, wearing a simple yellow dress. She walked slowly, her steps deliberate, but her balance was true. Her head was held high, a small, confident smile on her face. The sound in the room was a collective, sharp intake of breath. Board members half rose from their seats, their faces a tableau of utter shock. Corbett's jaw went slack, his face draining of all color. His entire carefully crafted argument was being dismantled before his eyes by a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress. Lyra didn't look at any of them. Her eyes were fixed on her mother. She walked the length of the long, silent room, her small shoes making a soft, steady rhythm on the carpet. She walked right up to Geneva, wrapped her arms around her waist, and hugged her tight. Geneva buried her face in her daughter's hair, a single, perfect tear rolling down her cheek. She looked up and met Penn's eyes. He was smiling, a smile that held all the love and pride in the world. She squeezed Lyra's shoulder, then stood to her full height, a queen reclaiming her throne. She faced the stunned, silent board. This, she said, her voice thick with an emotion that was no longer a weakness but her greatest strength, is my judgment. This is my leadership, and this is the real return on investment. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one of the oldest board members, a man who had challenged Geneva on dozens of deals, pushed his chair back and began to applaud. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Another director joined him, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, the boardroom filled with a thunderous ovation that was not for a CEO, but for a mother, for a miracle, and for the quiet man who had made it all possible. The thunderous applause in the boardroom eventually faded, replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. Daniel Corbett, a man hollowed out by his own ambition, packed his leather briefcase with trembling hands. His meticulously crafted coup had been dismantled not by a corporate counterattack, but by the simple, earth-shattering truth of a little girl walking across a carpet. He didn't look at anyone. He couldn't. One of the board members he had lobbied, a woman known for her sharp tongue, leaned over as he passed and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You should have aimed for the heart, Corbett. You went for the title, and you missed." Without a word, he turned and walked out of the room, his career at Lockwood Industries effectively over. One by one, the other board members approached Geneva. The old, cynical director who had started the applause came first. He took her hand. "Lockwood," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "For 20 years, I've watched you conquer this city with an iron fist. I never thought I'd see the day you'd conquer it with your heart. You have my full support. Build that center." They offered not just their congratulations, but their unwavering support. They saw what she had tried to tell them. The true strength of her leadership wasn't in a stock portfolio, but in the fierce, undeniable love that had just produced a miracle. As the room cleared, only 3 remained: Penn, Geneva, and Lyra, an island of quiet victory in the vast, empty room. Lyra looked up at her mother. "Did you do the brave thing, Mom?" Geneva knelt, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug, as if trying to memorize the feeling of her small, strong body against her own. "We did, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Over Lyra's shoulder, her eyes met Penn's. They were filled with a gratitude and affection so profound it made his heart ache. "We did it," she mouthed to him. He smiled, a slow, weary, wonderful smile. "No," he mouthed back, a certainty settling in his soul. "You did." 6 months later, the world was a different color. The Rhythm and Light Center stood not just as a building of brick and glass, but as a testament to hope. On the day before its grand opening, the center was buzzing with a joyful, chaotic energy. Volunteers were arranging flowers, technicians were testing sound systems, and a small group of the first enrolled students were getting a sneak peek. Penn moved through the halls, a set of blueprints tucked under his arm. He was no longer a ghost haunting the lobby of a skyscraper. He was the heart of this place, his quiet confidence now a beacon for the families who walked through the doors. He had found his calling not on a stage under spotlights, but here, surrounded by the sound of laughter and the scuff of determined feet on polished wood floors. Geneva was in the main studio, a glorious, sun-drenched space with yellow walls and a massive disco ball hanging from the ceiling, organizing the seating chart with her usual fierce efficiency. But the cold, corporate edge was gone, replaced by a hands-on passion. She had discovered that building a legacy was infinitely more satisfying than building an empire. Theirs was a partnership that had transcended the professional. They were a team, finishing each other's sentences, anticipating each other's needs, a deep, unspoken affection flowing between them in the shared glances and easy smiles. Yet, the final, most vulnerable words remained unsaid, a sweet, lingering tension in the air between them. On this last day of preparations, the calm was shattered by the arrival of an expensive foreign sports car that purred to a stop at the curb. Geneva, who was outside directing a delivery, froze. She recognized the car. A cold dread, a feeling she hadn't felt since the board meeting, crept up her spine. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was handsome, tan, and dressed in clothes that whispered wealth. He held a ridiculously large bouquet of white lilies, and his smile was the same charming, practiced smile that had once captured her heart and then shattered it. It was Richard, her ex-husband, Lyra's father. Penn was inside, watching through the large glass doors. He saw the car, the man, the flowers. He saw the way Geneva's posture stiffened. He saw a man who looked like he owned the world, a man who fit seamlessly into Geneva's old life. He looked down at his own hands, at the faint, ingrained grime under his nails that never truly washed away. a souvenir from years of mopping floors. He looked at Richard's expensive watch, at his polished shoes. He heard his smooth, confident voice drift in through the open door. And in that instant, Penn Holloway, the celebrated director, the healer, felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. He felt like the janitor again, an imposter, a placeholder. He instinctively took a step back, melting into the shadows of the hallway, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "Geneva," Richard said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I saw you on the news. What you've built here? It's incredible. Truly." "What are you doing here, Richard?" Geneva's voice was ice. "I came to celebrate, of course," Richard said, his smile never faltering. He knelt, extending the flowers toward Lyra, who had just appeared in the doorway. "And to see my little girl. I heard you were walking again, sweetie. Daddy is so proud of you." The word daddy hung in the air, a foreign coin he had no right to spend. Lyra looked at the flowers, then at her mother's stony face. She didn't move. "Why are you here?" Geneva repeated, her voice low and dangerous. Richard stood up, the charm offensive clearly failing. He switched tactics to manipulative sincerity. "Look, Geneva, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was a coward, I know that. But seeing Lyra, seeing this, I want to be a part of her life again. Don't I have a right to know my own daughter? Don't you think she deserves a father?" "She has a father," Geneva said, her voice quiet and deadly. Richard's eyes narrowed. He dropped the pretense. "All right, look. My PR team thinks this is a huge opportunity. A father reunited with his miraculously healed daughter. It's a powerful story of redemption. It could do wonders for my image, especially with the new IPO. There it was. Not love, not remorse. A business transaction, an opportunity." Geneva felt a rage so pure it was clarifying. "Let me tell you a story, Richard," she began, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "About a year ago, Lyra had a fever of 104. She was delirious, crying in her sleep. Not for me, for you. She was crying for her daddy. I called you. I left 3 voicemails. I texted you that your daughter was sick and scared. I found out later you were on a yacht in Monaco. You didn't call back for a week, so don't you dare stand here on the day of her triumph and talk to me about being a father." Richard actually took a step back, shocked by her ferocity. "That's not fair." "Fair," she laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "Fair was the janitor who knelt on a cold marble floor and asked my silent daughter to dance. Fair was the man who held her hand and told her she was a queen when she couldn't even sit up by herself. Fair was the man who taught her that falling wasn't failing. You ran from the battle, Richard. You don't get to plant a flag on the victory hill. Now get out of here before I call security." Defeated by a truth he couldn't spin, Richard thrust the bouquet of flowers into the arms of a stunned volunteer and retreated to his expensive car, speeding away from the life he had so easily discarded. Shaking with adrenaline, Geneva turned and went to find Penn. He wasn't in the main studio. She found him in one of the smaller, empty dance rooms, quietly wiping down the mirrors with a cloth, his movements rhythmic, mindless. He was hiding in his old job. "Penn," she said softly. He didn't turn. "He's her father, Geneva." "No," she said, walking up behind him. "He was a sperm donor. There's a difference." "He looks like he belongs here," Penn said, his voice hollow. "In this world, with you." He finally turned, and she saw the old, familiar grief in his eyes, the insecurity she thought they had vanquished. "I'm a janitor who got lucky, Geneva. That's all. I don't belong in your life. Not really. Not when a man like him can just walk back in. The world will always see me as the project, and you as the patron." This was his final ghost. The deepest one. The fear that he was just a temporary fix. A character in a chapter of her life that was about to end. Geneva reached out and grabbed his hands, stilling their nervous motion with the cloth. She forced him to look at her. "These hands," she said, her voice fierce. "These are the hands that held my daughter's when she was terrified. These are the hands that taught her how to be strong. His hands signed a check and walked away. Don't you ever compare yourself to him? Tears welled in her eyes, tears of love and frustration. Don't you get it yet? You didn't just teach her to walk, Pen. You taught me how to live again, how to feel. I was a ghost in a power suit, and you reminded me I had a heart. She took a shaky breath. You are not a project. You are the foundation. You are the reason we are whole. She looked him in the eye, all her walls gone, her heart laid bare. I love you, Pen, not because you fixed my daughter, but because you healed me. He stared at her, the words washing over him, dousing the last of his fears. The door creaked open, and Lyra stood there, holding a single white lily. She walked up to Pen, her face serious. Richard brought flowers, she said, her voice clear. You brought my legs back. She held out the lily to him. I choose you. Pen took the flower, his hand trembling. He looked at Lyra, this incredible, brave little girl. He looked at Geneva, this fierce, beautiful woman who was offering him a future he thought he'd lost forever. He pulled them both into a hug, burying his face in their hair. A broken man made whole. I love you too, Geneva, he whispered. I love you both so much. The grand opening the next day was a triumph. Geneva's speech, now infused with an even deeper understanding of what family meant, moved the entire audience to tears. And when the music started, and the three of them took the center of the floor, their dance was more than a performance. It was a declaration. He lifted her hand, and in that gesture was the memory of a janitor first asking a lonely girl to dance. Geneva spun under his arm, a move not of a CEO, but of a woman surrendering to joy. And Lyra moved between them, her steps not just walking, but soaring, a bridge of pure light connecting their two worlds. It was the story of three people who had found each other in the dark and danced their way into the light. As the last notes faded and the crowd rose to its feet, Pen leaned over to Geneva, Lyra's hand held tight between them. So, he whispered, a smile playing on his lips, about that disco ball. I was thinking a fog machine might be nice too. Geneva laughed, a sound so full of love and joy it filled the entire center. Don't push your luck, Holloway, she whispered back, and standing on her toes, in front of everyone, she kissed him. And from the back of the room, it felt as though two other dancers, a woman and a little girl, were smiling down, their own hearts finally at peace, their light shining brighter than ever, scattered into 1,000 rainbows by the slowly turning disco ball. So, that's the end of our story. I really hope a piece of it stays with you. If there was a moment or even just a character that really hit home, I'd honestly be honored to read about it in the comments. It's just amazing to see how one story can land in so many different ways. Look, if you believe stories like this are a kind of light we need in the world, your support means everything. When you like and subscribe, you're doing more than just helping a channel grow. You're really casting a vote for stories that aren't afraid to look at what makes us human, and you're helping that light find someone who might be in the dark. Thank you for lending me your time. It means a lot. Until the next chapter, take care of yourselves and each other.